Thank you.
Our next panelist is Mr. Bob McCubbin. Bob with his companion Bear, and I'm sorry that I didn't get to see Bear because that is the cutest dog I have ever seen. Bob and Bear hail from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Bob started collecting books and photos from the Old West when he was a very young child. His interest specifically, he says, is outlaws, lawmen, and cowboys. And that interest has grown into one of the largest collections of vintage books and photographs around. But unlike many collectors, Bob allows others to use his collection to their own quests to find new stories about which to write. He's also the publisher of True Western Stories, a wonderful magazine in which you can often view pictures from his collection and articles about the amazing true Old West stories that have filled his life. It's some of that knowledge that he's going to share with us today. Bob McCubbin.
Thank you. I really don't know whether to sit down or stand up, but if I have to refer to my notes, I hope you'll excuse me while like Stephanie said, I am very nervous, and looking out across here, I'm thinking I should have worn my hat. Sure, a lot of hats out there. But I want to thank Evetts Haley for inviting me here. It's a real honor for me. I had the privilege of knowing J. Evetts Haley, and I was here at the opening of this wonderful library with Carl and Vivian Herzog many years ago. So it's just a real pleasure to be here, although I'm still not quite sure why I'm here. But I will. Evetts gave me some hints that you might want to know what motivates a collector. And unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that one either, but all I know is, and I've come to the conclusion that collectors are born and they're made. You don't become a collector. You're either a collector or you're not a collector. But I did share collecting with J. Evetts Haley. As you all know by that wonderful library and photos and everything in there, he was one of the greatest collectors of all time. And that's what he and I had in common, you might say. But I started collecting when I was like 12 years old. I started with stamps, which is what a lot of kids do. And quickly my interest turned to books, enjoyed books. And I never was a cowboy or a cattleman. And I wasn't around many cows, so my education is sadly lacking. But I had a lot of friends who were in the cattle business, and I grew up among Indians in Oklahoma. And my grandparents were pioneers in Oklahoma. They started out as farmers, not cattlemen, in a dugout in Oklahoma Territory, 1890s. But I started collecting, and collecting is a passion. It's something that is incurable. And I've been to analysts and through therapy and all that, but I'm still a collector. And it can be a problem if you got with wives and children. Any of you who are collectors can relate to that, I think. The wives think the collection is like a mistress or something, and the children think they have been abused by being pulled into so many bookstores through their life. But it's a wonderful, wonderful pastime. When I started collecting, I didn't have any money. I was like 12, 14 years old, and so I'd buy whatever I could afford, which were generally the little $1 reprints. And so I started writing to the authors. That only cost 3 cents at that time, 3-cent stamp. And I wrote to Walter Prescott Webb and William McLeod Rain and Stuart Lake and Wayne Guard. I hope those names are familiar to some of you out there, but they were writers in the 50s and the 60s and before. And they were all very, very gracious, and they would send me letters and autograph slips and even books that they'd written that I didn't have. And one of those authors I wrote was J. Evetts Haley. And if any of you had any correspondence with Mr. Haley, you know that every letter he sent, if he thought you was a collector, were a collector, why he would include a little pamphlet or a little article clipping, something that he'd written to add to your collection. So first time I ever met Mr. Haley was in his house in Canyon, Texas. I was living in Gallup, New Mexico, and it was such a thrill to me to go into his home and his library. And on his desk, I brought books for him to sign, and on his desk was a little book called The Life of John Wesley Hardin, and it was something I had written an introduction to back in 1961. I like to tell people that that was my dad, but it really was me. But it was a very youthful effort on my part, but Mr. Haley was thoughtful enough to pull the book out of his library and ask me to autograph it for him, which was such an honor and a thrill for me. And that book is over there in the library now. So, another question that Mr. Haley asked was, or Evis asked, you might be interested in how a person acquires and finds books on books and photographs. My collection consists of first edition books on the Old West, mainly cowboys, outlaws, lawmen, and original photographs. How many of you out there consider yourselves to be collectors? There's a few. Some of you aren't quite sure. You may be an accumulator rather than a collector. But the main way nowadays that I find books is through like a network of friends and dealers and other collectors and also authors that I have got to know over the years. And Bob Alexander over here, about less than a year ago, found a book for me that I've been searching for like 30 years and never had a chance to find. And it's called, I collected the books of Charlie Siringo, who I hope a lot of you recognize, but the only book I was missing was a little pamphlet called A Song Companion of a Lone Star Cowboy. And Bob Alexander had, through his research into Dave Allison, had located a copy among the Allison family. Well, I ended up with it. It's not only a beautiful copy, but it happens to be inscribed to Dave Allison by Charles Siringo. That makes it a very, very special thing for a collector, and I thank Bob for that opportunity. Another thing, I'm going to stay within my time. An example. Okay, let me ask y'all, how many of you know who Ben Thompson is, the Texas gunfighter, Ben Thompson? Oh my goodness. You guys need to read your history. Ben Thompson was one of the top 10 or so gunfighters of the Old West. He gained his notoriety all over the West, but mostly in Austin, Texas. And King Fisher, how about King Fisher? You ever hear of King Fisher? Yes. A few more hands. That's getting a little bit further west, I guess. He was down around Uvalde. But anyway, I had an opportunity to acquire a photograph of Ben Thompson. That's what this is. I've blown it up. It's about a third this size, really. But this photograph was taken about 2 weeks before Ben Thompson was killed in San Antonio. And I called a friend of mine when I got onto this photograph, a collector friend. I said, hey, I've located an original photograph of Ben Thompson. And he said, wow. I said, that's great. He said, never seen one come up to be available. And I said, well, what's really great about this is what's written on the back. And he said, oh yeah, what does it say? To my friend King Fisher from Ben Thompson? I said, how did you know? this photograph, the story on this photograph is that Kingfisher came to see Ben Thompson in Austin on October 11th, 1884, and they, as they usually did, made the rounds of the saloons, and at some point, Ben Thompson gave this photograph to Kingfisher, and he inscribed on the back, "To my friend Kingfisher, Ben Thompson, Austin, Texas, March 11th, 1884. They then got on a train and went down to San Antonio and made the rounds of some more saloons, and they ended up in Jack Harris's Variety Theater, and they were both gunned down. And there's still differences of opinion of just what happened there, but they were both killed. They were both riddled with bullets. And the newspaper, there's a newspaper account that tells about it, and it says a photograph of Ben Thompson was found on Kingfisher's body. And that's this photo. And just to add to it, well, there's some blood stains on there. They have to be Ben Thompson, or Kingfisher's blood. And I got this photograph through my friendship with an author who is, his name is Tom Bicknell, and he's writing a biography of Ben Thompson and Kingfisher. And again, it was a connection with somebody that, an author, a friend, or that gave me the opportunity to buy that. It was in Austin, Texas, and gave me great pleasure to get it at a bargain price because the guy I got it from was a lawyer. And don't you just like to get to a lawyer once in a while? One more thing. This very, very ugly little knife, butcher knife, is the knife that Billy the Kid had in his hand the night he was killed in Fort Sumner by Pat Garrett. Now, how do I know that? Because by itself, this knife might be worth $5 because it's probably it goes back to the 1870s and 80s and all of that, but it's a very ordinary little butcher knife. I know it, Billy the Kid had it because, again, through the help of a friend who is an author, Frederick Nolan, very familiar to the people at the Haley Library. He found out that this knife was still in the family of Paulita Maxwell, who was Billy the Kid's girlfriend in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. And it passed down, I've got the names in my note, but it passed down through the women in the family. It went from Paulita Maxwell to her daughter Adelina, to her daughter Ollie, to her daughter Susan. And Fred and I tracked it down, and they also have affidavits from Delavenia Maxwell, who was the Maxwell's Navajo servant, and who knew Billy the Kid, testifying that this was the knife that Billy the Kid was carrying. So to a collector, you know, this is like the Holy Grail or something, you know. It's
Was it $5?
it's worth more than $5, I think. At least I wouldn't take less than $6 for it. But maybe I've got the information that goes with it and all, and maybe I can get in there next to Bob afterwards if any of you want to look at it and hold it. And so I think I've used my time, so thank you all very much.